What's up, everybody? It's Coach Nick, and welcome to today's video lecture on the strength training progression models known as single, double, and triple progression. If you look down into the description of this video, you will see a link for both a text and a slideshow PDF download that you can use to follow along with this video lecture or just to have for your own future reference. Both the text PDF and the slideshow PDF have the same exact information in them. They're just being presented in those two different formats. So first, let's talk about our lecture objectives, the main topics that we're going to be going over today. The first of which will be the workout variables that we will be manipulating during these progression models, and that's going to include resistance, repetitions, and sets. From there, we're going to go over some essential training terms and training statuses that are going to come up very frequently during our discussion of these progression models. And then from there, we'll move on to a discussion of each individual progression model, single, double, and triple, where we'll look at the details and nuances of each one, the mechanisms of how they work, and how you can apply them to a long-term training program on an inter-workout basis and then a more aggressive intra-workout basis. So the first thing we're going to do is define the relevant workout variables that are going to be involved with these progression models. The first of which is going to be the resistance, and this is basically how much force are you moving against. This can be traditional weights like dumbbells and barbells. This can be elastic resistance like with bands. This can be body weight if we're talking about calisthenic stuff. But for the purposes of this video lecture, we're going to refer to as resistance weights as traditional weights, dumbbells, and barbells. From there, we're going to talk about repetitions, usually just shortened down to reps. This is the number of times you perform an exercise in a row before taking a rest break. So if you're doing curls and you do 10 in a row before taking a rest, that is 10 repetitions or 10 reps. And then after that is sets. Those 10 reps we just talked about, that would be a set of bicep curls. And then the total number of sets is just the total groupings of repetitions that you did on each exercise per workout. Next up, we're going to talk about some of the essential terms that are going to come up frequently during our discussion today. The first of which is going to be failure. Now, when we're talking about strength training, there are many different types and definitions of failure, each of which needs to be discussed at length because they all have their own complexities and nuances. But for today's video lecture, we are going to define failure as the point at which another repetition could not be completed with full range of motion, safe and appropriate technique, and without external assistance, aka your spotter helping you. So that's just how we're going to be defining it for the purposes of this video lecture. And just another note, we're simply defining what failure is here. We're not saying that it is a requirement to train to be able to make progress. After that, we're going to discuss repetitions in reserve, usually abbreviated down to the acronym of RIR. Repetitions in reserve represent how many more reps do you think you could have performed after the conclusion of a set? How many repetitions in reserve do you think you had left? Zero RIR, or not having any reps in reserve. This is the type of rep that people have referred to as being a grinder. This probably takes about twice as long as the first repetition of the set, and is also going to be noticeably longer to complete than the repetition that preceded it. This is the type of rep where you barely complete it, and your spotter is probably very poised to try to help you. That's what zero looks like, and that's what it generally feels like. 1 to 2, there is RIR. There is going to be significant bar slowdown by then, especially with 1 repetition in reserve. The bar might start to slow down as soon as 4 repetitions in reserve, but by the time you're down to 1 or 2, it will be noticeable to both the spotter or an observer, and the lifter is probably going to feel how much longer it's starting to take for these reps to take. 1 repetition in reserve, while slower, is not going to be as painfully slow or almost as close to non-completion as 0 reps in reserve. So one other thing to note about RIR is a lot of people, especially novice and beginner lifters, have trouble properly rating RIR because you probably haven't spent a lot of time training to or near failure, and you just need more lifting experience and time to be able to figure that out. There are some advanced and very advanced lifters that still struggle to rate RIR for themselves, even after they've had years and thousands of repetitions of practice to try to get good at it. So it can be difficult, but it is a learnable skill. If you find that over time you really don't think you're reliable for rating your own reps in reserve, and you don't have a trainer or a coach or a gym buddy or a partner that you could use that, you might want to use some other methods of trying to rate how close to failure you are. That can be, is the range of motion that you're using reducing? Like in the case of a bicep curl, are you now only doing 3/4 curls instead of all the way up? On bench press, are you not hitting your chest? Squats, are you no longer now making it down to parallel or whatever depth you were doing before? So that's one way to look at it. Technique breakdowns, if you're starting to have to swing too much, use momentum, or you notice that there's a major form deviation, that can also be a sign that you're probably done for the set. And then the last method is to be monitoring bar or weight speed, which is also the last essential term we're going to talk about. How quickly the bar and weight moves throughout a set is going to change, as we previously discussed. Obviously, as you get closer to failure and muscle fatigue accrues across the set, the bar or weight is going to move slower and slower the closer you get to that point. As we discussed, 0, this is when the bar is going to be moving its slowest. That's a grinder. 1 to 2, this is going to be noticeably slow, just not as painfully slow as 0. And this slowdown is probably going to start for most people somewhere in the 2 to 4 RIR range. That is going to depend on the lifter and is probably also going to depend on the lift. There is some technology out there that can be used to monitor bar and weight speed, but the best way to do this is either just to have somebody reliable watching you, and it's also something like RIR that you just develop a feel for over time. When you first start out on a lift, it might be a little hard to get a feel for it because everything is new, but after you've had some time with a certain exercise, it'll get a little bit easier. So those are our essential terms for the video lecture. The next thing we're going to move on to is a discussion of training statuses. Now, the exact timeline as to what makes somebody a novice versus a beginner versus an intermediate, that'll differ depending on what source you're looking at. The exact specific numbers involved don't really matter. It's just a general categorization. The way I look at it, a novice is somebody who has between 0 and 3 months of consistent lifting experience. That's working out probably 2 to 3 times a week, a good solid workout. The reason why I look at 0 to 3 months, 0, obviously nothing. You can't be anything but a novice. Around that 3-ish month mark, that's when somebody's going to start noticing more of the beginner's gains. They're going to start getting some of the muscular hypertrophy. And by that point, you've probably put in about 12-ish total workouts. You've done each of the main lifts. They're going to be a part of your initial program a few times by now. So you're not completely untrained. You're not completely new. So around that 3-ish mark is when I consider a novice going to a beginner. A beginner, I would say, then picks up around that 3-month mark, and then this lasts to around 6-ish to 10-ish months. The reason why the second half of this one is speculative, in my opinion, is because those beginner's gains that we just mentioned, that initial rapid increase in strength, and then the later rapid increase in muscle hypertrophy. For most people, this is going to start to diminish somewhere in that 6 to 10 month window. That's going to depend very heavily on the individual, how they've been training, other stuff they have like their nutrition and their recovery habits. So where in that 6 to 10 month window the beginner's game stops depends very heavily on a lot of things. Just for most people, it will generally stop somewhere in that window. So that's why I have that as the back half for beginner. Intermediate then will pick up somewhere in that 6 or 10 month mark, and this is up to about 2 years of consistent training. That's going to be pretty universally agreed on across the board. After about 2 years, you're going to start getting to the upper end of your lifting skill. You will have done so many of the lifts so many times that you will have learned them very well, even some of the harder, more complex ones. And you're going to start beginning towards the upper percentages of the upper ceiling of how strong and how big you can get, assuming you've been training properly, eating right, and all that for those 2 years. And then very advanced, this is 5+ years. By this point, you theoretically could be at your maximum strength and muscle size, or very close to it. This is where you're probably going to be spending months, maybe a year, just to add a 1/4 pound of muscle mass or add 5 pounds to a weight PR. So that's our training statuses. Now we can move on to a discussion of the single progression model now that we know all the foundational information that we need. Single progression models are aptly named such because in these models only one single variable is manipulated in order to make progress. Most commonly in a single progression model, weight is going to be the variable that is manipulated. Usually repetitions and sets are fixed in single progression models. There are some variations on them that do manipulate these two things instead of weight, but they end up being more similar to double or triple progression models, or they are very specific to very niche or specific goals. Now, a good way to look at how a single progression model can be applied is through an example. So we know it's about increasing weight over time, so we're going to see how we can do that. So we're going to go with the example of a bench press where our lifter in this example, they have barbell bench press, they're going for 3 sets of 5 reps, and they have 185 pounds on there. So we're going to say that the lifter is able to complete all three sets of 5 reps with 185 pounds, and the lifter thinks that they had 1 repetition in reserve at the end of the final set. All lifters have to have some type of progression parameter to determine when it's time to move forward. We can use bar speed as we discussed. We can use RIR ratings. You can try to use an outside observer to try to give you advice on that. In this example, our lifter is going to use the progression parameter of looking for 2 repetitions in reserve before advancing to the next weight. We're going to say that they don't have a spotter or a lifting partner that could come get them if they got in trouble, or that there's nobody reliable around the gym. So they're playing it a little bit safer and they're leaving 2 reps in reserve just in case. They get on to their next workout. This could be 3 to 5 days later, somewhere like that. And this time around, the lifter is able to complete all 5 sets with 185 pounds, but now they have the 2 RIR at the end of the final set. And they'll know this because they'll re-rack that 5th rep on the 3rd set, and they'll feel like they're not as fatigued, or they will have noticed that there was not as much bar slowdown. They know that because the bar was moving quicker, they weren't as fatigued, so that means they're further away from failure, which means they probably had an extra repetition in reserve. So because the lifter has hit their progression parameter of 2 RIR, they're now ready to move forward. And because we're talking about a single progression model, the way forward is going to be through adding weight. Now, ideally, because you've added 1 RIR, you're 1 repetition stronger, which means you're roughly 3% stronger than you were previously. Ideally, that would mean you would bump up by 3% about, but if you're lifting in a commercial gym or you have any standard gym setup, you're probably jumping in 5 to 10 pound increments just because of what type of plates are usually available. For this example, we're going to say our lifter is going to move up from 185 to 195. So they'll get to workout number 3, which again, that can be like 3 to 5 days later, depending on this lifter's schedule. They're going to go to 3 sets of 5 reps now with 195 pounds. Let's say that the lifter complete all 3 sets of 5 reps with 195, but they're back down to only 1 repetition in reserve. Just like before, the lifter will have self-rated having this lower RIR. They will have felt the bar slow down compared to their previous workout where they used 185 for all 3 sets. So they're not ready to move forward as per their own progression parameter. And that's going to take them on to workout 4, 3 to 5-ish days later. They're going to go after the same set rep weight goal. This time, just as before, they notice now 2 RIR. Not as much fatigue, the bar does not slow down as much. So now, as per their own parameters, they are ready to move forward and progress. They're going to add more weight. They'll go for 3 sets of 5 with 205 the next time around. So that is, and then they're going to continue that progression until a change needs to be made, i.e. their progress stops. So that's everything for just the regular single progression model. And so far we've been discussing it in terms of what do you do to increase from workout to workout, but there's a more aggressive intra-workout version, the single progression model that can be used, which we'll go over here. The sets and reps are still going to remain fixed, but as we look at our example here, we're going to see the same setup, 3 sets of 5, 185. The lifter completes that first workout, 1 RIR. They have not hit their progression parameter yet of 2 RIR, so they're going to stick with that for workout 2. We get to workout 2, just as before. They're able to complete that first set of 5 reps, but this time with the 185, it's 2 RIR. So they hit their progression parameter in the first set here, and they're being more aggressive, and they're using this intra-workout version of it. So instead of going on to the second and third set with 185 trying to achieve 2 RIR, the lifter is going to make the attempt to increase by 5 pounds, and they're going to go through the second and the third set with 190. And the most likely result of this is the second set. If they could get 5, it's only going to be with 1 rep in reserve because they've added weight and there's some fatigue. And then if they're able to finish the third set of 5, it's probably going to be with 1 or 0 RIR. So they hit their progression parameter after their first set in the workout, and they use this intra-workout, more aggressive version to make a jump up inside the workout rather than waiting until to jump up later. And then we see with the example of workout 3 and workout 4, they go through the same routine where they try to build back up to the 3 sets of 5 with the 2 RIR, and if they're able to hit the 2 RIR early, they will bump up within the workout. And just like with the regular model, you would continue this progression moving forward until a change needed to be made. Now, if you're using this more aggressive intra-workout version, and sometimes this will happen in the inter-workout version too, it's not uncommon that when you bump up to the new weight for the first time that you're not going to be able to hit the rep count that you need. That's pretty standard and normal. You're not always going to be able to increase at the same rate indefinitely. If you could, you'd just be able to keep getting stronger to insane degrees forever. So if you're using this aggressive intra-workout version, expect that if you're bumping up within a workout that you might not always be able to hit the rep goal right away. To summarize and conclude the single progression model, we're talking about a fixed prescribed number of sets and reps over time, where you focus on increasing the weight every time you're able to achieve that set and rep prescription within whatever progression parameters you have set out for yourself. Now, the single progression model has a lot of advantages to it, starting off with the fact it's very simple, intuitive, easy to use, doesn't require a whole lot of complex programming, so it's very friendly to lifters of all training statuses and experiences, and it also focuses on weight being added to the bar over time, and that's going to be your longest long-term driver of both strength and muscular hypertrophy gains, so it's got some good benefits in that regard too. People who are heavily motivated by increasing weight, or if your goals are very maximally strength oriented, the single progression model usually fits pretty well for people like that or goals like that, because it's all about adding weight to the bar over time, so it's just a good fit. Single progression models can be used effectively for all types of exercises, but I think that they fit best for heavier compound lifts. Reason being, these exercises involve a greater number of muscle groups in the lift, and the muscle groups that are involved tend to be bigger. If we're looking at the bench press, we've got the pecs, the shoulders, and the triceps. The back, we've got lats, rhomboids, and biceps, versus pec fly, where it's only the chest. Tricep pushdowns, where it's only the triceps, curls, where it's only the biceps, etc. So because we have more muscles and a lot of the bigger ones, there's a bigger strength ceiling, or a higher strength ceiling, so you're less likely to get to the end point of what you can achieve with a single progression model sooner with those types of lifts compared to the isolation or accessory lifts. Now, some of the drawbacks of the single progression model, the first of which is it's not very forgiving to bad workouts. Because you have a prescribed set rep weight amount, if you're the type of lifter where not getting your numbers is psychologically bad for you, this type of progression model can be a little bit rough on that because the numbers needed to be done are very specific. This can also lead to some lifters pushing through bad technique and potentially injuring themselves because they're so desperate to achieve whatever the set and rep count is with that weight for the workout. So that's a couple of drawbacks. And then advanced and very advanced lifters who make strength progress very slowly over time, or you've maxed out your muscle hypertrophy. Because moving forward on weight is going to be one of the hardest things to do, that type of lifter might also get a little demotivated if they're stalled out on this type of model for too long. And then, as previously discussed, not as great of a fit for the isolation or smaller muscle groups exercises, at least not over the long term. At the beginning, it's fine because you're able to build strength and size pretty quickly, But because we're talking about exercises that involve a smaller number and generally smaller size muscle groups, the strength ceiling is a lot lower than those heavier compound lifts. So if we're talking about a progression model that emphasizes increased weight over time, and we're applying that to lifts where the strength ceiling is a lot lower, you're more likely to hit a long-term plateau than if you were to switch to something else. So single progression models can be very good at first for the smaller isolation, lighter lifts, but in the long term, you're probably going to have to end up switching to a different progression model. All right, so that's going to summarize and conclude the single progression model. We can now move on to double progressions. Moving on to the double progression model, if you can guess, there are two double variables that are manipulated during this progression model, and this is most commonly presented as being the weight and then the repetition count that gets manipulated during the standard application of the double progression. There are some variations that will use a weight set manipulation or a rep set manipulation, but they end up being more similar to triple progression models, or they're being applied to a very specific type of goal. So for the purposes of this video lecture, when we're talking about a double progression, we're talking about manipulating the weight and manipulating the reps, and the sets are going to remain fixed over time. Now in a single progression model, we saw that the rep count was fixed, but in a double progression model, we are going to be using a rep range. Now for double progression models, the rep range, there is no one correct range to use. The best range for you to use is going to depend on what your goals are, what exercise we're talking about, and what your goals for that given exercise also are. For the purposes of this video lecture, we're going to be talking about 8 to 12 rep ranges, just because that's usually pretty commonly discussed when talking about double progression, and it also uses a 4 rep spread, which is also the most common rep spread you'll see for rep ranges. So just to give a quick overview of what the double progression is, you have your rep range of 8 to 12. You pick a weight, you have a set count, and when you're able to achieve the number of sets and hit the upper end of the rep range using whatever RIR or weight speed parameter you have, when you get to the upper end of the rep range, you increase the weight, and then you build back up to the upper end of the rep range, and you just rinse and repeat. So an example we'll use for this one, we'll use the back squat. We'll say our lifter workout 1, they have the barbell back squat, 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps, and they're using 275 pounds. We'll say across these first 3 sets, they're not going to be able to achieve 12 reps. They're going to have very little RIR afterwards. So because they did not hit the upper end of the rep range, they're not ready to bump up weight for the next workout. So 3 to 5-ish days later, they come out for workout number 2 of barbell back squat. They've got their 3 sets of 8 to 12 with 275 pounds. We'll say for the sake of this example that on the first 2 sets, the lifter is able to hit 12 reps with 2 RIR, but on the third set, they're able to hit all 12 reps, but only with the 1 repetition in reserve. Now at this point, the lifter could decide to progress the weight and move on to 285 for 3 sets of 8 to 12 because they hit the upper end of the rep range on the last set, even though it wasn't the 2 RIR. Or the lifter could make the decision to hold off on bumping up this time and wait until they can get to the 2 RIR on the final set to make that weight increase. For the purposes of this example, we're going to say that the lifter is going to choose to increase the weight from 275 to 285 because they hit the upper end of the rep range. So they will also have rated the better IR on the first 2 sets because they will have felt the less fatigue. The bar wouldn't have slowed down. The same types of things that we looked at when discussing our single progression example. So this will now take us on to workout number 3, barbell back squat, 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps. We've bumped up to 285 pounds. Expectedly, because the lifter is bumping up to a new heaviest weight, they're probably not going to be able to hit the upper end of the rep range with the first workout. So in workout number 3, they do get through all 3 sets. They at least achieve the bottom end of the rep range with 285, but they don't hit the upper end with 2 RIR at any point. So when they move on to workout number 4, which is 3 to 5-ish days later, they'll go after it again with 285, and they will just continue this progression of trying to build up to 12 reps with the weight. Once they do within their progression parameters, they increase the weight, go back down, try to build back up, and they continue until a change needs to be made, i.e. progression stops. Now, just like with the single progression model, the double progression model also has a more intra-workout aggressive variation. We've looked at it on workout to workout. We'll now look at it from a set to set within the same workout. And for that, we're going to use the same example of the barbell back squat. 3 sets, 8 to 12 reps. This example will say that the lifter goes through the first workout, they're not going to hit 12 reps at that, which means workout number 2, they're going to come back with 275. For the purposes of this example, we'll say when they get to set number 1 in workout number 2, they're able to hit all 12 reps with 275. They have 2 RIR. Because this lifter is opting for the more aggressive intra-workout version of the double progression model, they will go after set 2 with 285 pounds, probably knowing that they're not going to be able to get the full 12 straight out of the gate. And then just like with the regular double progression model, you would just continue this progression of build up to the upper end, hit the weight, or increase the weight, build back up. You would just be doing it more quickly within the workout from a set to set basis rather than workout to workout basis. So that's our 2 different versions of the double progression model. The double progression model is very effective for lifters of all experiences and statuses, but I really like the double progression model, especially for novices and beginners, because it allows for a good rate of overall progression, but it allows the newer lifters to spend a little bit more time with lighter weight per lift. It gives them the opportunity to learn the technique and the form more effectively before they bump back up. Also, novices and beginner lifters who are experiencing the beginner's gains, the rapid increase in strength at the beginning and then the muscle mass that comes later, they usually develop strength and get stronger at a rate faster than they experience the muscle hypertrophy and the tendon resilience. This can mean if we're looking at a single progression model or a new lifter is just chasing more weight on the bar, it's not hard for them to accidentally load more weight than what their muscles and tendons can handle, and that can result in an injury. The double progression model is self-limiting on intensity in that regard, meaning it's harder to make an inappropriate over-choice in weight because there's a pre-existing requirement to achieve a higher rep count first. So the double progression model can just help to avoid that common source of injury for newer lifters. It's also more forgiving for bad workout days because there is a range of acceptable reps for the set to be considered a success instead of one specific number. So even if you don't hit the upper end, as long as you're at the lower end, the workout can still, or the set can still feel more successful. So it's a little more psychologically forgiving in that way, and you can avoid some of the demotivation that comes with not being able to hit the exact prescribed numbers that you need for a workout. Double progression models also appeal really well to people who have muscle hypertrophy or volume-oriented goals because this model allows for more rapid volume accumulation because you're focusing on increasing reps before weight, but you're still getting a pretty regular increase in weight, which is what you're going to need for long-term strength and muscle hypertrophy gains anyway. Double progression can be effectively applied to all types of exercises, but I believe that they tend to work and fit best with isolation and accessory, smaller, lighter exercises. Reason being, as we already discussed, these exercises use a smaller number of muscles and or smaller sized muscles, meaning that their strength ceiling is lower. So the double progression model, by focusing on the additional reps first, that can help to overcome some of the strength ceiling issues. It can also help to overcome the fact that the magnitude of increase on these smaller exercises is usually relatively larger than the heavier compound counterparts. Individuals who are particularly motivated by increasing weight or don't like increases in volume might not like the double progression model as much because it's more about that than it is chasing the weight overall. It is more forgiving towards bad workout days, but a pitfall of using a rep range is that it can become very easy to become complacent with always hitting the lower end of the rep range and never pushing up to the higher end of the rep range. Some people might also, just for them individually, find that it is difficult to add reps versus adding weight. So if you're that type of lifter, the double progression model might not also be as good of a fit for you. That is double progression. We are now ready to move on to triple progression. If you can guess it, triple progression works by manipulating triple the variables. So we're going to be looking at changing weight, reps, and sets over time in triple progression. Weight is going to be used the same way as before, where that is going to be increased once we hit our rep and our set range goals. Rep ranges are going to be used in the same exact way that we saw them used in double progression models. Now the difference with triple progression models is the set component, where instead of that being fixed over time like in single and double progression, we are going to be utilizing a set range similarly to how we use a rep range. And similarly to the rep range, there is no correct set range goal to use. It's going to depend entirely on what your goals are, what type of lift we're talking about, and what your goals on that specific lift are. So to see how we're going to manipulate weight, reps, and sets over time, let's look at a triple progression model example where we're going to use a lifter performing barbell back squats with 315. Their goal is to be able to build up to 3 sets of 5 reps with this. So for workout number 1, they're going to start off with 1 set of a rep range of 1 to 5 with 315. For this example, let's say they're able to complete this set with 5 reps, 2 repetitions in reserve. So that means they're ready to progress. Because we're using a triple progression model, instead of bumping up from 315 to 325, the lifter is instead going to add a second set of 1 to 5 to the next workout. So workout number 2 comes around 3 to 5-ish days later. The lifter is probably going to be able to complete that first set of 5 no problem. They're going to get to the second set of 5, and for the purposes of this example, we'll say that they only get 2 reps with 1 rep in reserve. So they did not hit the upper end of the repetition range, so they're not ready to increase anything for workout number 3. 3 to 5-ish days later, we get to workout number 3. They're going to go for the same thing. We're going to say this time they get to the second set, they've done it with 3 reps. So they improved from before. They still didn't hit the upper end of the rep range. They're going to keep going through this progression where they're going to keep trying to build up to getting the 5th rep with 2 reps in reserve on the additional set. Once they do that, they will add a 3rd set with 315. They will build up until they can do 5 reps on that 3rd set with 2 repetitions in reserve. And then from there, they will increase the weight from 315 to 325, and they will return all the way back to 1 set of 1 to 5. They will rebuild through the 1 to 5, add the 2nd set, rebuild, add the 3rd set, increase the weight, back to the start, and you just continue that progression until something needs to change, i.e. long-term progress stops. So that is the more normal inter-workout version of the triple progression. Just like the single and double, we'll also look at how we can do this on a more aggressive intra-workout basis using the same example of back squat, 1 to 3 sets, 1 to 5 reps, 315. And this one will say that the lifter isn't able to do it on the first time. They only get the 4 reps on that first set, so they're not able to progress from workout 1 to 2 at all. They get to workout number 2, 3 to 5-ish days later, and we'll say this time on set number 1, they're able to hit all 5 reps with 315. They're able to do it with 2 reps in reserve. So on this aggressive model, rather than waiting until next workout to add the 2nd set, the lifter is going to add that 2nd set to the end of their squat workout that day. They'll try a 2nd set with 315, see if they can get up to 5. They're probably only going to get like 2 or 3, so they're not going to be able to progress yet. And then they'll go after 2 sets of 1 to 5 at the onset of workout number 3. In this model, you just progress it the same way over time. You're just going to be adding a set within the workouts themselves if you achieve your progression parameters before the end of the workout or before you would get to the next workout overall. So the triple progression model, this is very good for advanced and very advanced lifters because when you've been lifting for 2 to 5+ years, progress is going to be made very slowly, both in terms of maximal strength and muscular hypertrophy. The triple progression model matches that slow rate of progression, so it makes it very appropriate for them. It also allows a lot of work with the same amount of heavy weight over time, which lends itself to a mastery of the weight. You spend a lot of time working through 315 on that back squat example. By the time you're ready to bump up to 325, you've been working with 315 for probably a few weeks. You've absolutely mastered that weight. You are then ready to move on. So that's another good why it's good for advanced and very advanced lifters. more ideal for maximally strength-oriented goals. You could definitely use triple progression for hypertrophy-oriented goals, but I think that that would most generally be better served with a double progression model, just because the volume accumulation on triple progression is very slow, and it's a little bit quicker on a double progression. But if you're a very advanced lifter, you might need to use a triple progression even for hypertrophy, because that's just how slow the progress is. I also think that this progression model is best applied to the main lifts, the heavy compound ones, mostly because this is a model that works best with low repetitions and heavy weight, and obviously your compound heavy lifts are going to be more conducive to that type of setup. Just like with hypertrophy-oriented goals, it's not to say that you couldn't use a triple progression model for the smaller isolation lifts. I just don't think it would be quite as a good fit as, say, a double progression model. Now, some of the drawbacks of the triple progression model: it is very boring, it's very slow, the progress is made in very small increments over a very large amount of time, and for that reason I don't think it would be the best for novice, beginner, or even most intermediate lifters, just because the triple progression rate of progress I think is much lower than those types of lifters' ability to make progress in the gym, so it wouldn't really be a very appropriate fit if you're not advanced or very advanced in most cases. So with all that being said, the triple progression model, in my opinion, I think it is mostly applicable to advanced and very advanced lifters, and those lifters within those training statuses whose goals are primarily maximally strength oriented. And within that, I think it would be best for those types of lifters to apply this to heavier compound exercises. An important note to make as we conclude here is that all the progress we were talking about in the examples during this video lecture were completely hypothetical for the purposes of making these progression models easy to talk about. The amount and rate of progress that you will make using any of the progression models in this video will depend heavily on your age, biological sex, your training status, your training consistency and intensity, your nutrition, and your recovery habits. So all that being said, if you found this video to be enjoyable and or educational, please feel free to give it a like. If you have any questions or comments about anything that I discussed, feel free to leave those down below. And if there's anything you'd like to discuss further or any topics you'd like to see me cover in the future, feel free to leave those down below as well. If this type of educational fitness and lifting content appeals to you, please consider subscribing to the channel. This has been Coach Nick. I hope this video was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.